He lived a quiet life in a small village in the northern part of Japan. People in the village only knew him as the overweight farmer, who always wore faded clothes and worked from dawn until dusk. His small farmhouse stood at the edge of the rice fields, surrounded by rolling hills and winding dirt roads. From a distance he seemed ordinary, someone who spent his days tending to the earth, repairing broken tools and taking care of stray cats and dogs that wandered near his home. Most mornings, he could be seen trudging through the fields, carrying buckets of water or tending the soil with a slow but steady rhythm. His back was broad, his hands rough from years of labor, and his face always wore a gentle, calm expression. Villagers sometimes whispered about him, wondering why he had moved to their remote village so many years ago. No one knew much about his past. When they asked about it, he would simply smile and say, "It's a long story and it is best left behind." Despite his quiet nature, he was respected. People admired how carefully he cared for his land. Every rice plant was straight, every row neat, and his fields always flourished. In a village where many farmers struggled to make ends meet, he seemed to have a touch of luck, though he never spoke of it. His neighbors often stopped by to ask advice or borrow tools, and he always welcomed them with a warm smile. But few stayed long enough to really see him, the real man behind the kind eyes. The farmer's daily routine was simple and predictable. He woke up early, just as the first light crept over the hills. He drank green tea, ate a small breakfast, and headed out to the fields. By mid-morning, he would take a break, sometimes sitting under the shade of an old cherry tree, looking at the horizon as if remembering something far away. After lunch, he worked on repairing fences, tending animals, or fixing old equipment that most people would have thrown away. As evening approached, he returned to his modest home, prepared a simple meal, and sat quietly by the window, listening to the wind through the trees. Life went on this way for years. The villagers were used to his presence, seeing him as just another hard-working farmer. But underneath the calm exterior, there was something they could not see, something that made him unlike anyone else in the village. For a long time, he had left a life of danger behind, a life that few could even imagine, a life that, if anyone discovered, would shock them all. One day, rumors started spreading in the village about a new project. A wealthy developer had bought land nearby and planned to build a resort, a place that would bring tourists, luxury, and money. Most villagers were excited, thinking it could mean new opportunities. But when the developer's men came knocking on the farmer's gate, asking him to sell his land, the excitement turned into tension. The farmer listened carefully, his expression unreadable. The men tried to persuade him, offering money and promises of a better life. He shook his head gently and said, "This land has been in my family for generations. I cannot sell it. It is my home." The men laughed, thinking it was just the stubbornness of an old overweight farmer. They did not know what they were dealing with. When they left, they promised to return. That night, the farmer sat alone in his home. The house was quiet except for the soft crackling of a small stove. He opened a dusty chest that he rarely touched. Inside were photographs, medals, and a folded military uniform that had faded with age. His hands trembled slightly as he held the items, and memories he had tried to forget rushed back. He was not always a farmer. He had served in one of Japan's most elite military units. He had trained in ways most people could never imagine. He had faced danger that would have terrified anyone. But he had left that life behind, choosing peace over conflict, simplicity over chaos. For a moment, he allowed himself to remember. The early mornings filled with intense training, the missions that took him to remote and dangerous places, the skills he had honed over years of service, and then, like a shadow, the memory of the people he had lost, the friends who never returned, and the heavy cost of a life filled with violence. He had chosen to leave it all behind. He folded the uniform carefully and put it back in the chest. "I hoped I would never need this again," he whispered to himself. The next morning, the men returned. This time, there were more of them. They came with anger in their eyes and bats in their hands. They expected him to be frightened, to give in to their demands. But when they approached his gate, the farmer stepped out. His broad frame and calm presence surprised them. "You should leave," he said simply. There was no fear in his voice, no hesitation. The men laughed, mocking his size and appearance. "What can you do?" One of them sneered. "You're just a fat old farmer." But the farmer did not move quickly, did not shout, and did not show anger. Instead, he stood quietly, assessing the situation. His hands rested on the wooden handle of a hoe, but it was not the tool that mattered. His body, trained for years, remembered everything. Every maneuver, every reaction, every skill he had learned in his past life was still there, hidden beneath the soft exterior of a farmer's body. The men approached, thinking it would be easy. The first one tried to push him, expecting resistance. But the farmer moved smoothly, sidestepping and using the man's own momentum against him. Within seconds, the man was on the ground, disarmed and stunned. The other men hesitated, confused by his speed and precision. They were not expecting resistance from someone who looked so ordinary. The farmer did not strike with anger or malice. He simply moved efficiently, controlling the situation without unnecessary force. One of the men shouted, "Who are you?" The farmer looked at them, calm and steady. "Just a man protecting his home," he said. The attackers, unsure of what to do, stepped back. For a moment, the quiet village seemed to hold its breath. No one had seen anything like this before. The men retreated, muttering threats, and left. But they knew they had underestimated him. After the men left, the farmer returned to his home. He sat by the window looking at the fields he loved. He knew the peace he had built would be tested again. The men would return stronger and angrier. But he also knew that he was ready. He had left the life of conflict behind, but the skills, the instincts, and the courage remained within him. That evening, the village children played near his fence, unaware of what had just happened. The neighbors continued their routines, still seeing him as the quiet farmer who worked hard and kept to himself. Only he knew the truth. He prepared for the days ahead, quietly checking his home, thinking through strategies and ensuring he could defend what was his. But more than anything, he thought about why he had chosen this life. It was not about fear or revenge. It was about peace, dignity, and protecting what mattered most. As the sun set behind the hills, the farmer looked out over his fields. The rice swayed gently in the evening breeze, and the animals wandered close to his house. For now, the village was calm and he was at peace. But deep inside, he was ready. The calm, overweight farmer was not just a farmer. He was someone who had faced the worst the world had to offer, survived and chosen to live a quiet life. And if anyone came to take that life from him, they would see just how much strength could hide behind a calm, kind face. And so the quiet life continued. With a shadow of the past resting lightly behind his broad shoulders, he worked, he tended the fields, and he smiled at the world around him. But he also waited, prepared, knowing that the calm before the storm was often the most dangerous moment of all. The villagers, unaware of the hero in their midst, continued their routines. They saw only the man who worked hard, who helped when asked, and who spoke little of himself. But one day they would see the truth, and when that day came, no one would ever look at him the same way again. Until then, he lived his life quietly, tending his fields, caring for the animals, and protecting the home that had become his sanctuary. A man who had survived the impossible now survived something equally important: the simple, peaceful life he had fought so hard to earn. The next few days passed quietly, but the farmer could feel the tension in the air. Even though the village looked peaceful, he knew the men who had come before would not give up so easily. The Yakuza did not like being embarrassed, and he had humiliated them in front of his own fields. That was a mistake they would not forget. Every morning he walked through his rice paddies with a careful eye. He checked every fence post, every gate, and every tool. He made small adjustments to ensure his land could be defended if necessary. Villagers passed by, greeting him as usual, but he hardly spoke. He needed to think, to plan, and to remember skills he had not used for many years. At night, when the wind was soft and the stars reflected on the wet fields, he sat quietly in his small house. He opened the old chest again, looking at the medals and photographs inside. Each photo showed a younger version of himself, fit and focused, dressed in a sharp uniform, eyes clear with determination. There were images of exercises, of missions, and of a few close friends who had served alongside him. He remembered their laughter, their courage, and the quiet moments when they shared stories under the night sky. He had chosen to leave that world behind. He had wanted peace, a life where he could wake up each morning without fear, without blood on his hands, without orders that could change his fate at a moment's notice. But the past, he realized, never truly leaves. It waits quietly like shadows under the moonlight, ready to remind him of what he was capable of. One afternoon, a villager came running toward his farmhouse. The man was young, pale, and sweating, holding a small note in his hand. He looked frightened, glancing behind him as if someone were following. "They're back," he whispered. "More men, bigger than last time. They're planning to come tonight. They said they will make you regret saying no." The farmer nodded. He had expected this. He had been ready for it, mentally and physically. But now the threat felt closer, real in the village, and he knew he had to act before anyone else got hurt. He went out to the shed and carefully cleaned and organized his tools. He picked up the old hoe, a strong wooden handle with a heavy metal blade, and examined it. It was simple, ordinary to anyone else, but in his hands it could be a weapon of precision. He also gathered ropes, nets, and a few heavy chains, placing them near the barn where he could reach them quickly. Every movement was deliberate, calm, and practiced. As evening approached, he walked slowly along the edge of his fields, looking toward the hills. The sun painted the sky with shades of orange and red, and the wind rustled the rice plants gently. He breathed deeply, letting the calm wash over him even as his mind prepared for the coming storm. The villagers watched from a distance. They had seen him face trouble before, but this time they could tell it was serious. The group that had threatened him earlier had connections, power, and numbers. If the farmer were just an ordinary man, they might have succeeded in scaring him away. But he was not ordinary. Night fell and the village was quiet. Only the sound of insects filled the air. The farmer stayed alert, sitting near a small lantern in his living room listening. Hours passed and then he heard the faint hum of engines. The sound was low, careful, but unmistakable. They were coming. He moved quickly, not in panic, but with efficiency. He opened the barn doors and checked the perimeter. Small traps and obstacles were in place. Tripwires connected to noise-making cans, simple nets that could catch an unsuspecting intruder, and hidden ropes that could immobilize someone if necessary. Every step he had taken was calculated, using his years of training to anticipate what the attackers might do. The first men approached slowly, thinking they were sneaking up on a simple farmer. They moved through the shadows, unaware that the ground beneath them had been prepared. A sudden tripwire sent a can clanging across the ground, startling them. Another stumbled into a hidden net, struggling to free himself while the farmer watched from the shadows. They had expected an easy fight, but what they found was something entirely different. The calm, overweight farmer was not helpless. He moved silently, stepping from shadow to shadow, using his environment to his advantage. When one man lunged at him, he sidestepped with precise timing, using the attacker's strength to push him into a muddy patch of field. Another tried to strike from behind, but the farmer twisted and redirected the force, sending him sprawling without serious injury. It was not brute force that made him dangerous. It was control, patience, and the ability to anticipate every move. Each attacker, confident at first, soon realized that he was not facing a simple man, but someone who had lived a life where danger was constant and survival depended on skill and focus. The night seemed endless, the quiet broken by the sounds of confusion and frustration from the intruders. They were careful, but they had underestimated him. One by one, they found themselves trapped, caught in nets, tangled in ropes, or sliding in mud. The farmer moved among them with a calm authority, never shouting, never losing control. He guided them without unnecessary harm, making sure no serious injury occurred. From a distance, the villagers could see lights flickering and hear sounds of struggle, but they did not dare approach. They had always respected the farmer, but now they saw the truth. The man they thought was quiet and ordinary was something else entirely. He had not only protected his land, but he had also shown a strength that left even the toughest men confused and frightened. After an hour, the intruders were immobilized, frustrated, and humiliated. The farmer tied the last ropes carefully, making sure each one was secure. He did not celebrate, did not laugh. He simply looked at the men and said softly, "Leave. Do not return." When the police arrived, summoned anonymously by someone from the village, they found the men in disarray, trapped, but unharmed. There were no injuries, no violence beyond what was necessary to defend his home. The farmer watched quietly, making sure the situation was under control before speaking to anyone. The officers looked at him, clearly surprised. "Did you do all this by yourself?" one asked, astonished. The farmer nodded, not boasting, not trying to impress. "I protected my home," he said simply. "Nothing more." Word spread quickly through the village and beyond. By morning, rumors had reached nearby towns and even the local news. Everyone wanted to know about the farmer who had defended his land against the mafia. He became a topic of curiosity, a story of courage and skill that no one had expected from someone who looked so ordinary. But he did not seek attention. He returned to his daily routine, checking his fields, repairing fences, and caring for his animals. The medals and photos remained tucked away in his chest, a reminder of the life he had once led and the skills that had kept him alive. As days passed, he continued preparing quietly. He set small alarms, reinforced weak points in his property, and planned escape routes in case the situation escalated further. He knew the men might come back stronger and more determined, but he also knew that he could face them. The calm, overweight farmer had the mind and body of someone who had survived situations far worse than this. The villagers, still unsure of what they had witnessed, began to see him differently. Children who once ran past him now stopped to wave and smile. Neighbors looked at him with a new respect, realizing that beneath the gentle exterior was a man capable of incredible control and courage. He understood the admiration, but it did not change him. He remained quiet, humble, and focused on what mattered most: the safety of his home, the peace of his village, and the life he had chosen. His past was a tool, not a trophy, and he would only use it when absolutely necessary. The nights continued to be tense. He could hear distant voices, the faint hum of vehicles approaching, and the subtle signs of men watching. But he remained calm, patient, and observant. He knew that every action he took now could make the difference between peace and chaos. Through it all, he never lost sight of why he had left his old life behind. He wanted simplicity, dignity, and a place where he could live without fear. But life had a way of reminding him that the past never truly leaves. It waits quietly, testing the present, challenging the calm, and asking whether the choices he had made were strong enough to endure the storms that still came. And so, he waited, prepared, and watched. Every shadow, every sound, every movement in the village became part of his awareness. He was ready for whatever came next. The calm farmer was no longer just a quiet man tending fields. He was a guardian, a protector, and someone whose strength was hidden beneath a gentle, unassuming exterior. The night passed without further incident, and as the first light of dawn broke across the hills, he stood in his fields once more. The rice shimmered in the morning dew, the animals moved quietly, and the village began its day unaware of the storm that had nearly arrived. He smiled softly to himself, not out of pride but out of understanding. Peace was fragile and courage was often silent. He had defended both, and he would continue to do so for as long as he could. For now, the farmer returned to his work, quietly preparing for the challenges that lay ahead. But one thing was certain: the calm, overweight farmer was no longer just a farmer. He was a man who had faced danger before, survived, and remained ready to protect what mattered most. The days passed slowly, but tension hung heavy over the small village. The farmer knew the first confrontation had been only a warning. The men who had come before were not the real leaders. They were pawns. The real threat, the men who planned everything, would not be satisfied until they had forced him from his land. He had faced life and death situations before, but this time was different. This time it was personal, and the stakes were his home, his life, and the peaceful world he had built for himself. Each morning, he walked through his rice fields with quiet determination. He inspected the fences, checked the gates, and walked the perimeter of his land. Every small detail mattered. He had set traps before, simple things like tripwires connected to cans that would make noise if someone stepped on them, and small nets hidden in the grass. He also created subtle paths through the fields where he could move quickly and quietly, using the natural landscape to his advantage. The villagers began to notice small changes around his property. He installed simple lights along the edges of the fields, tied ropes in places that looked ordinary but were functional, and built barriers that seemed like part of the farm but were designed to slow intruders. No one asked questions. They trusted him, but they also sensed that something serious was coming. One afternoon, a young man from the village approached him. He was carrying a note from a stranger, someone claiming to be sent by the developer. The note was a threat, It warned that if the farmer did not sell his land, he would face consequences that he could not escape. The words were harsh and filled with arrogance, meant to intimidate, but they had the opposite effect. The farmer read the note carefully, folded it, and placed it in his pocket. "They think fear will work," he said softly to himself. "They do not know who they are dealing with." Night came again, and with it the sounds of distant engines and whispered voices. This time the group was larger, better organized, and more confident. They had come prepared, expecting to face a simple, overweight farmer who would give in under pressure. They were wrong. The farmer moved quietly through his home, checking each point of entry. He placed ropes in strategic locations, set up nets, and positioned himself in a place where he could see everything without being seen. He moved with the same calm precision that had once allowed him to survive situations far more dangerous than this. As the first intruders approached, they stepped onto his property with arrogance. They thought they were clever, moving carefully to avoid the previous traps. But the farmer had anticipated their movements. A slight noise here, a shadow there, and he knew exactly where each man was. The first man reached for the gate, but the farmer triggered a small device that made a loud clang, startling him. He stumbled, losing balance, and fell into a shallow pit disguised as a patch of mud. The others tried to help him, but as they did, they walked into nets hidden in the grass. Confusion spread quickly among them. The farmer did not rush. He stayed calm, observing, waiting for the perfect moment to act. One of the men finally realized something was wrong. "Where is he?" he shouted, panic rising in his voice. "This is impossible. He's just a farmer." The farmer moved silently, stepping from shadow to shadow. He approached the first man who had fallen and, without hurting him, disarmed him and tied his hands using a rope. The motion was quick, precise, and efficient. He repeated the same with the others, moving through the field with a skill that was almost invisible to the untrained eye. He was not using brute force. He was using technique, control, and careful observation. Every movement was calculated. He anticipated their reactions before they even made them, and he used their own mistakes against them. Each man struggled, frustrated and confused, realizing that the farmer was more than just a man with a hoe. He was a strategist, a fighter, and someone who had survived unimaginable challenges. From a distance, the village remained quiet. No one dared approach. They could hear the sounds of struggle and the occasional shout, but the night remained calm in other ways. The rice fields swayed gently, the animals were quiet, and the wind moved softly through the trees. It was almost peaceful except for the chaos unfolding quietly in the shadows. One man, the largest of the group, managed to free himself and lunged toward the farmer. He swung a heavy stick, hoping to catch the man off guard. The farmer moved with a speed that surprised even himself, sidestepping the attack and using the man's momentum to guide him into a mud patch. The man fell hard, covered in dirt and humiliation. "Stop," another shouted, realizing that their confidence was slipping. "He's not just a farmer. He's trained. Call for help!" But by then, it was too late. The farmer had already moved among them, controlling their positions and actions with calm authority. Within minutes, all of the men were disarmed, immobilized, and tied carefully with ropes. None were seriously hurt, but all were completely unable to continue their attack. He stepped back, surveying the field. The moonlight reflected on the rice paddies, and the intruders looked like defeated shadows, tangled and confused. He breathed deeply, the calm after action settling over him. He had faced danger, controlled it, and maintained the peace of his land without causing unnecessary harm. The first rays of dawn began to break over the hills. The men who had attacked him were silent, exhausted and frightened. He untied the last rope and handed it to one of the older intruders. "Leave," he said softly. "Do not come back. This land is not yours to take." They did not argue. They left quietly, defeated by someone they had assumed was weak. The farmer watched them go, knowing that the real challenge was still ahead. The leaders of the group, the ones who had sent them, would not forgive this embarrassment. They would come themselves or send even stronger forces. But he was ready. He returned to his home, sitting by the small lantern that glowed softly in the corner. He opened the chest once more, looking at the old uniform and medals. They were reminders of a past life, a life of danger and survival. He had hoped never to need those skills again, but the past had a way of catching up. The village slowly came to life around him. Farmers tended their fields, Children ran along the paths and neighbors greeted him as usual. No one suspected the truth. They saw only the quiet man who worked hard, smiled often, and kept to himself. They did not see the calm determination, the precise mind, or the courage hidden behind his gentle exterior. Throughout the day, he continued his preparations. He reinforced fences, hid traps, and ensured that every part of his property was secure. He practiced movements quietly, anticipating attacks and testing his reflexes. Every step he took was deliberate, shaped by years of training and experience. That night he sat by the window, watching the hills in the distance. He could see faint lights moving slowly, shadows that did not belong to the village. The leaders were coming and he knew it. But he did not feel fear. Fear had never helped him survive. Instead, he felt calm, focused, and ready. He remembered the missions he had taken part in long ago, operations in distant lands, situations where the smallest mistake could cost lives, and moments where every decision mattered. Those memories were not painful anymore. They were lessons, reminders that he could handle challenges with clarity and control. As he prepared for the night ahead, he thought about the villagers who trusted him, the animals he cared for, and the land he had worked so hard to protect. This was his life, simple yet precious, and he would defend it, not out of pride or anger, but out of love for the quiet, peaceful world he had built. The hours passed slowly. The intruders approached with caution this time, aware of what had happened before. But the farmer was ready. He had studied their patterns, anticipated their movements, and prepared the terrain to his advantage. Every trap, every obstacle, and every shadow was placed carefully, designed to confuse and control without unnecessary harm. When the first men stepped onto the property, they hesitated. They remembered the humiliation of the last encounter, the strange precision with which they had been defeated. Panic began to set in. The farmer moved silently, watching, waiting, and controlling every part of the field. By midnight, all the intruders were immobilized once again, tangled in nets or tied with ropes. None were seriously hurt, but all were completely unable to continue. The farmer walked through the field, checking each one calmly. "Leave," he said. "Do not return." They obeyed. They had no choice. The calm, overweight farmer had proven that he was not to be underestimated. When the sun rose over the village, he returned to his daily routine as if nothing had happened. The field shimmered in the morning light, the animals moved quietly, and the villagers went about their lives, unaware of the quiet storm that had passed through the night. The farmer smiled softly to himself. He knew the challenges were far from over. The leaders of the group would come and the threat would grow stronger. But he was ready, calm, patient, and prepared. He had shown that courage and skill could exist in even the most unassuming places. For now, he returned to his work, tending the fields, repairing fences, and caring for the animals. The rice grew tall and green. The wind moved gently through the hills, and life went on in the quiet village. But beneath the calm, the farmer waited, ready for the next challenge, knowing that he had the strength, skill, and determination to protect the home he loved more than. The quiet of the village was beginning to feel fragile. Even as the farmer went about his daily routine, he could sense the tension lingering in the air. Every morning he walked through his fields with careful eyes, checking the rice paddies, the fences, and the boundaries of his property. He inspected the traps and obstacles he had set, making small adjustments to improve them. He worked with patience, as he always did, but his mind was focused on the possibility of what was coming next. The intruders from before had not returned, but the farmer knew better than to believe that they were gone for good. The leaders of the group who had sent them would not accept defeat easily. They would come themselves, or they would send stronger, better prepared men. The farmer's instincts told him that the next encounter would be more dangerous, and he treated it with the seriousness it deserved. He spent his days preparing quietly, almost like a ritual. He reinforced fences with hidden stakes, placed ropes and nets in ways that seemed ordinary but were functional, and created subtle obstacles across the fields that could slow down or trap anyone who tried to move quickly. He studied the terrain carefully, thinking about every angle, every approach, and every possible move the attackers might make. He was not doing this out of fear, but out of responsibility. His land, his home, and his life were worth protecting. At night, he practiced movements in the shadows. He moved quietly, testing his reflexes, remembering the training from his past life. Even though he had left that life behind, the skills were still there, hidden beneath the calm exterior of the overweight farmer. His muscles remembered every motion, every step, every technique. It was not about strength alone. It was about precision, timing, and anticipation. The villagers remained unaware of the full extent of his preparations. They saw him working in the fields, repairing fences, and caring for his animals. They admired his dedication and calm presence, but they had no idea that beneath his quiet exterior was a man ready for anything. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, he noticed unusual activity near the edge of the village. Shadows moved in ways that seemed deliberate and controlled. Vehicles approached slowly, carefully avoiding the main paths. He knew immediately that this was not a casual visit. The real threat had arrived. The farmer moved quickly but quietly, checking each point of entry and ensuring that his traps were ready. The nets were positioned along paths where the attackers might step. Tripwires were connected to noise-making devices, and the ropes were hidden but easily accessible. He used the natural features of the land, trees, ditches, and small hills, to create strategic advantages. As the first men approached, they were cautious. They had learned something from the previous encounters, but they still underestimated him. They did not know that the calm farmer had once been one of the most highly trained soldiers in the country. They did not know that every step he took was calculated, every movement deliberate, and every action based on experience and skill. The first intruder stepped onto the property, and the farmer triggered a tripwire, sending a loud clang through the night. The man stumbled, losing his balance, and fell into a shallow ditch. The others tried to help, but as they moved, they triggered hidden nets and ropes, becoming entangled and frustrated. The farmer observed silently, watching how they reacted, anticipating their next moves. He moved among them with calm precision, disarming and controlling each one without unnecessary force. His movements were smooth, almost invisible, and completely efficient. Each intruder realized too late that they were not facing an ordinary man. They were facing someone who had survived situations far more dangerous than this, someone whose mind and body worked together in perfect harmony. The largest of the intruders, a man known for his strength, managed to free himself and attack the farmer with a heavy stick. The farmer sidestepped easily, using the man's momentum to send him sprawling into the mud. Another tried to sneak up from behind, but the farmer twisted and redirected him, guiding him into a net. The attackers were skilled, but they were no match for someone who had trained for years in survival, strategy, and control. From a distance, the village remained silent. The residents did not dare approach. They could hear the sounds of struggle, the occasional shout, and the movement of men across the fields, but they did not know what was happening. They did not know that the calm, overweight farmer they had admired was showing them the truth of his skill and courage. By the middle of the night, the majority of the intruders were immobilized, tangled in nets or tied with ropes. None were seriously injured, but all were completely unable to continue their attack. The farmer moved among them, checking each one, ensuring that no harm had come unnecessarily and confirming that they would leave and never return. "Leave," he said quietly, his voice calm but firm. "Do not come back." The intruders hesitated. They were frustrated, exhausted, and humiliated. They had expected an easy victory, but they had been defeated by someone they had assumed was weak. Slowly they withdrew, retreating into the night, leaving the farmer alone once again. He returned to his house, sitting by the small lantern that cast a warm glow over the room. He opened the chest and looked at the medals, photographs, and folded uniform inside. They were reminders of a past life, a life filled with danger, responsibility, and survival. He had hoped never to need those skills again, but the world had a way of testing him when he least expected it. He thought about the villagers, the animals, and the land he had worked so hard to protect. They had no idea of the danger that had passed through their village, and he intended to keep it that way. They did not need to know the full story. They only needed to live in peace, and he would ensure that peace. The next day, he continued his preparations. He reinforced weak points, checked traps, and practiced movements quietly. He also observed the village, noticing small changes in behavior. People moved more cautiously. Whispers spread about the farmer who defended his land, and children lingered near their homes instead of running freely. The presence of danger was subtle, but it was there, and the farmer was aware of it. At night, he remained vigilant. He could hear distant voices, the low hum of engines, and the occasional rustle of movement. He did not panic. Panic had never helped him survive, and it would not help him now. Instead, he remained calm, focused, and ready. Hours passed in quiet observation. He moved through the shadows, testing his reflexes and ensuring that every part of his property was secure. He checked his nets, ropes, and obstacles, making minor adjustments to improve their effectiveness. He moved with the precision of someone who had learned to survive in the most dangerous circumstances. Suddenly, he noticed a vehicle approaching from a hidden path. Its headlights were low and it moved slowly as if testing the area. The farmer crouched low, watching carefully. He could see the shadows of men inside, their posture confident but cautious. They had learned something from the previous encounters, but they still underestimated him. He waited patiently, observing their movements, anticipating their actions, and preparing his response. The night was silent except for the soft rustling of the rice plants and the distant sound of the vehicle. The tension was palpable, but the farmer remained calm. He had faced situations far worse than this, and he knew how to control them. When the intruders finally stepped onto the property, he moved with deliberate speed and precision. The first man tripped on a hidden rope, falling into a shallow ditch. Another stepped onto a net, becoming tangled and struggling to free himself. The farmer moved among them, disarming and controlling each one with calm authority. The largest intruder tried to charge at him, but the farmer sidestepped, using his momentum to guide him into the mud. Another tried to sneak up from behind, but the farmer twisted and redirected him into a trap. The intruders were skilled, but they were no match for someone who had trained for years in strategy, survival, and control. By the early morning hours, the intruders were immobilized, frustrated, and exhausted. The farmer checked each one carefully, ensuring that no harm had come unnecessarily. He untied one man and guided him to the edge of the property, repeating quietly, "Leave. Do not come back." They obeyed, slowly retreating into the night. The farmer returned to his house, sitting quietly by the lantern. The rice field shimmered in the morning light. The animals moved quietly and the village remained peaceful. No one knew what had happened, and that was exactly how he wanted it. The farmer understood that the challenges were far from over. The leaders of the group would not accept defeat easily. They would come again, and the next encounter could be even more dangerous. But he was ready. Calm, patient, and prepared, he had proven that courage, skill, and determination could exist in even the most unassuming places. He returned to his work, tending the fields, repairing fences, and caring for the animals. The wind moved softly through the rice paddies, and the village continued its quiet rhythm. Yet beneath the calm, the farmer waited, ready for the next challenge, knowing that he had the strength and skill to protect the home he loved more than anything in the world. The calm of the village felt fragile, but the farmer moved with quiet confidence. He had prepared for weeks, reinforcing his land, setting traps, and honing his reflexes. Every detail mattered. Every fence post, every patch of ground, every shadow could make a difference. He knew the final challenge would be the hardest. The mafia leaders would come themselves this time, not pawns, not weak enforcers. They would come with strength, numbers, and determination. But he was ready. The morning sun rose over the fields, painting the rice paddies with golden light. The birds sang, and the villagers went about their routines, unaware of the storm that was approaching. The farmer worked quietly, checking the gates and walking the boundaries of his land. The traps were ready, the ropes and nets hidden but strategically placed. Every path into his property had been considered, and every possible move of the intruders had been anticipated. As evening approached, a sense of tension filled the air. The farmer could feel it in the way the wind shifted through the trees, in the distant hum of vehicles moving along hidden roads. The leaders were arriving, and with them came a new level of danger. He did not panic. Panic had never helped him survive. Instead, he remained calm, steady, and fully aware. Night fell and the shadows deepened. He sat quietly in his house, listening. The sounds of engines, footsteps, and voices were faint but deliberate. The intruders were cautious, knowing the farmer had already defeated their men twice. But they did not understand the full measure of the man they faced. They saw a calm, overweight farmer, a man who worked his fields and smiled at the villagers. They did not see the strength, skill, and discipline beneath that exterior. The farmer moved quietly, checking each point of entry. He made small adjustments to traps, positioned himself in advantageous spots, and observed the movements of the intruders through the shadows. He did not rush. Every moment counted, and patience was his greatest ally. The first men stepped onto the property carefully, testing the ground. A tripwire triggered, sending a loud clang echoing through the night. The intruder stumbled, losing balance, and fell into a shallow ditch. Another stepped on a hidden net, struggling to free himself. The farmer moved silently among them, guiding each one into the traps he had set. His movements were precise, deliberate, and efficient. The largest of the intruders charged him with a heavy stick, but the farmer sidestepped effortlessly, using the man's momentum to send him sprawling into the mud. Another tried to attack from behind, but he was guided into a trap with careful redirection. Each man realized too late that they were not dealing with an ordinary farmer. They were facing someone who had survived far more dangerous situations and had learned to control every outcome with calm skill. From a distance, the village remained quiet. The residents could hear occasional sounds of struggle but did not dare approach. They did not know that the man they admired for his gentle demeanor and hard work was revealing a side of himself that was both extraordinary and necessary. Hours passed. The intruders were frustrated, exhausted, and immobilized by ropes and nets. They had no choice but to obey the farmer's calm but firm instructions: leave and never return. Slowly, they retreated, defeated not by anger but by precision, control, and intelligence. When the sun rose, the farmer returned to his house. He opened the chest that had been his silent companion for years. Inside were medals, photographs, and the folded uniform of his past. He had once been part of an elite military unit, trained for missions that few could even imagine. He had left that life behind, seeking peace and simplicity, but the past had a way of catching up when least expected. He thought about the villagers, the animals, and the land he had worked so hard to protect. They had no idea of the danger that had passed through their village, and he intended to keep it that way. Peace was fragile, and he understood that his role was not to seek recognition but to ensure that the life he valued most could continue. Word of the farmer's actions began to spread quietly. Some villagers had seen the aftermath, the tangled intruders, and whispered stories about what had happened. The tales grew with each retelling, turning the calm farmer into a figure of quiet legend. Yet he remained unchanged, returning to his work with the same dedication and humility as always. Days passed, and life in the village slowly returned to normal. The rice paddies grew tall and green. Animals wandered the fields, and the villagers continued their routines, still unaware of the full story behind the calm, overweight farmer who protected them. The intruders never returned, deterred not by violence, but by the quiet strength and skill they had faced. One morning, a former military commander, who had recognized the farmer from his past, came to visit. He had seen the news, heard the rumors, and wanted to meet the man who had demonstrated such extraordinary courage and skill. The commander approached the farmhouse and bowed deeply. "I have watched your actions," he said quietly. "You have shown not only skill but honor. Your country could use more men like you." The farmer smiled softly, shaking his head. "I do not seek recognition," he replied. "I only protect what I love." The commander nodded, understanding. "You have done more than that. You have reminded everyone that courage is not always loud, and that strength often lives in silence." After the commander left, the farmer returned to his fields. Tending the rice, repairing fences, and caring for his animals, he continued his work with quiet dignity, aware that the past had shaped him but not defined him. The life he had chosen, simple, peaceful, and full of care for the land and people around him, was what mattered most. Weeks later, the villagers, hearing stories of what had happened, began to look at him differently. They no longer saw just a quiet farmer. They saw a man who had lived a life of courage, who had faced danger and who had protected them without ever asking for anything in return. Children who once ran past him now waved and smiled. Neighbors greeted him with deeper respect, and the village as a whole felt safer knowing he was there. The farmer remained humble. He never boasted, never spoke of the past, and never sought attention. To the villagers, he was still the gentle man who worked hard and helped others. But those who knew the truth understood that beneath his calm exterior was a man of extraordinary skill and courage, a man who had faced impossible odds and emerged not just alive, but stronger and wiser. Life returned to its quiet rhythm. The rice swayed in the gentle breeze, The animals wandered freely, and the villagers moved through their days with a sense of calm. The farmer continued to care for his land and his animals, always alert but never fearful, always prepared but never aggressive. He had achieved something few could. He had protected his home, maintained peace, and done so with integrity and control. The intruders never returned. The mafia leaders, realizing the farmer was not to be trifled with, left the village alone. The calm, overweight farmer had defended his land not with anger or violence, but with intelligence, skill, and quiet determination. He continued to live his life as he always had, waking early, tending the fields, caring for animals, and maintaining the land. He remained a figure of quiet strength, respected by those around him and admired for his courage, though few knew the full story. One evening, as the sun set over the hills, he sat under a cherry tree at the edge of his field. The sky was painted with shades of orange and pink. The rice fields shimmered in the last light of day, and the air was calm. He watched the horizon, thinking of the life he had chosen, the challenges he had faced, and the peace he had earned. For the farmer, life was not about fame or recognition. It was about protecting what mattered, maintaining integrity, and living with dignity. He had once faced extraordinary dangers in a world far from these fields, but he had chosen this life because it was meaningful, because it allowed him to care, to grow, and to live without fear. The villagers continued their routines, unaware of the full story behind the quiet, overweight farmer who had faced danger and protected them all. They saw him as a kind, hard-working man who cared for his land and animals. They did not see the full measure of his courage, his skill, or the depth of his past. And that was exactly how he wanted it. The farmer returned to his work the next day, moving through the rice fields with calm precision. He repaired fences, tended to his animals, and prepared the land for the next season. Life was simple, peaceful, and full of purpose. He had survived, protected his home, and maintained the peace he cherished. At the end of the day, he looked out over the fields once more. The wind moved gently through the rice paddies. The animals wandered freely, and the village remained calm. The farmer smiled softly, knowing that he had done what few could, defended his life and land, faced danger with courage, and returned to peace without losing himself. He had become more than a farmer in the eyes of those who knew the story. He had become a guardian, a protector, and a symbol of quiet strength. Yet to the villagers, he remained simply the man who worked hard, cared for his land, and lived with humility. And that, he knew, was the greatest victory of all. In the peaceful fields of the village, the farmer returned to the life he loved most, simple, quiet, and full of dignity. The past had shaped him, but it did not define him. The future remained unwritten, but he was ready for it, calm, skilled, and confident in his ability to